It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
On winter fuel allowance. This is really tough, and I do get that it's tough. It's not easy, and no Prime Minister wants to take a decision like this.
But this union leader's not convinced.
People do not understand how a Labour government has decided to pick the pocket of pensioners and at the same time leave the richest in our society totally untouched. That is wrong, and he needs to change course.
If you don't have a clear idea of who's got a right to be here and who hasn't, which is what modern technology and a digital ID would give you, then, at any one time you can have 750,000 to 1 million people here without proper permission.
Could digital ID cards help tackle illegal migration?
I think the main thing, Michael, is that Mr. and Mrs. Parker applied to buy the house because they liked it very much.
It's a policy which is a legacy of Margaret Thatcher. Should Labour restrict council tenants' right to buy their homes? Joining us today, Labour's Natasha Irons, Shadow Health and Science Minister Sakib Bhatti, Ava Santina Evans from Politics Jo, and talk presenter Alex Phillips. This is Politics Live. Let's start with the front page of The Sun with this headline: Mass release starts chaos as 2,000 lags free in 24 hours. This is about the emergency measures, as the government have called them, to deal with prison overcrowding in England and Wales. It includes early release for some prisoners when they've served 40% of their sentence, and that release starts today. My opening question to the panel this Monday is, are there reasons for the public to be fearful? Natasha.
Well, I think we're in a situation where we've had to take some very decisive action here. We've had, I think the male population of prisoners has been at a capacity of like 99%. That is just unsustainable and a terrible inheritance. We're putting in place measures to ensure that certain types of offenders will not be released, and those that are released, there are plans in place to make sure that they are monitored closely. We've employed an extra 1,000 trainee probation officers to help with this transition this time. So I think the public can be secure in the knowledge that this government is taking tough action to ensure that our prisons do not become a chaotic mess and collapse, and that we're also making sure that we're looking after those prisoners that are out early, and to make sure that they are being looked after and monitored as closely as possible.
Sakib, are there reasons for the public to be fearful or not?
Well, look, I'm worried, and I'm worried because at the moment we don't have a clear direction of travel from the Labour government. We know, of course, the prison estate was under strain. We know that, but we took a decision not to release prisoners, and that was being managed. When Keir Starmer needed prison space over the summer, it was the capital investment that we'd made that was released and allowed 500 more spaces to be released in Rutland and places like Kent. What is the plan now? We're releasing prisoners. We're giving a green light to criminals to say, go and offend, and actually, you know what, you'll only serve 40% of your your sentence. I mean, it's pretty unacceptable.
I wouldn't characterise it as a green light. I'd characterise it as a government trying to take action where the previous government hasn't done it. It's a kind of symbolic thing that our prisons are overcrowded to the point of collapse, and we've had to take this action. The long-term plan for this government isn't just to allow people to become out earlier. It's to ensure that we've got the capacity in the system over the longer term. It's a tough decision that the previous government refused to make. We've made these nationally important pieces of infrastructure that have to be built, but also we've partnered with James Timpson to ensure that we look at how we keep people out of prison. At the moment, the prison system is creating better criminals and not better citizens. We can't carry on like that.
We're talking about 1,700 prisoners, according to the government, and it has happened before, early release, under previous administrations, both Conservative and Labour. But on this occasion, are there reasons for the public to be fearful?
Well, when you bring in any policy quickly, it doesn't go through the scrutiny that perhaps it should go through, and then that means that certain people do slip through the cracks, and then that means that people who've been the victims of domestic abuse might be fearful that some of their, people who've been put away might be released today and they haven't been alerted to it. But we've also got a real problem with reoffending and with release in general. And it doesn't really matter if people are serving 50% of their sentence or 40% of their sentence. A lot of people are reoffending, and the reason for that is we've got a terrible parole system. We've got, probation is a total mess. The entire prison system is in disarray, and I don't think that we can put this, whole fearful, all of the blame on this particular policy when actually the whole thing is, a mess.
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, the whole thing's a mess. The public are fearful anyway, regardless of who's being released in this next part of this programme. The public are fearful anyway because crime on the streets has gone up. When you look at some of the crimes that are barely being investigated now, it's almost as if so many things have been decriminalised. People are genuinely worried about having their house burgled, about being mugged, about having their watch stolen, their phone snatched. When it happened to me, the police just didn't even reply. When you look at this particular scheme and where we've had Early Dawn rolled out as a pilot programme in in various parts of the country, we've seen the rate of recidivism is around a quarter. So a quarter of people who get released early have gone on to reoffend and end up back inside. That's not that untypical of the rate anyway. So I agree, the whole system from top to bottom is a mess. We actually have longer sentences in this country than most other countries, but they're not working.
All right. This is a subject we'll come back to, I'm sure, over the programmes in the next few weeks. But let's talk about the debate that has been raging over the government's early decision to means test winter fuel payments for pensioners. It's been dominating the news. Let's have a listen to this exchange from yesterday's Laura Kunsberg show with the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
One of the decisions also that has attracted huge amount of attention and has very much upset some of our viewers is your decision to remove winter fuel allowance from the majority of pensioners. As you know, our viewers like to give us questions for politicians, and Ray Bosdet, who voted for you, wrote in to say, "I thought I might regret my vote within a year. I certainly didn't think I would regret it by the first decision made by the new government to attack the pensioners, those in this country who cannot go on to strike, to show our disgust." What do you say to Ray, who voted for you and feels terribly let down by this decision?
What I say to Ray and to many people who will have concerns, who are watching this and listening to this, is that we were voted into office to bring about change, to make sure we improve living standards, make people feel better off, to improve public services, to deal with crime, deal with immigration and issues like that. I am absolutely clear in my own mind that we can't bring about that change if we don't fix the fundamentals and stabilise our economy. I'm absolutely clear. In the same way, Laura, as I was 4 or 5 years ago when you were interviewing me and I said, in order for Labour to win an election, we have to change the Labour Party. Equally clear in my mind, in order to deliver the change, which we will deliver, we have to fix the foundations now. And that's tough decisions.
Well, let's hear from the Ray in question. Ray Bosdet, as you heard, he is a pensioner, still works for a fire safety consultancy, and he joins us. Hello to you, Ray, from Motherwell in Scotland, where a Scottish version of the winter fuel payment will be means tested too as a result of the decision by the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. What did you make, Ray, of the Prime Minister's response to your question?
Well, I don't think he answered it at all, really, Jo. It was as though he was reading from a well-rehearsed script. My question was very much, why choose the pensioners as the first line of attack? Those that can't fight back on their own, they can't go on strike or withdraw their labour. He didn't answer that at all.
When you say as a first line of attack, what about the principle itself? Because there will be many, you qualify for the winter fuel allowance as it is currently instated, but there will be many who will ask why pensioners like you get a winter fuel payment.
That's a very fair comment, and there will be quite a lot of us, I guess, that we don't actually need that £200. I mean, personally, every year I give mine to charity, but there are very, very many, particularly in this area that I live in, who really do need that £200 to heat their homes during the winter.
Ray, we have a Labour MP here in the studio, Natasha Irons. Natasha, do you want to respond to what you've just heard from Ray?
Well, I want to thank Ray for telling me and the other panellists about his experience and what his concerns are. I totally understand that. I think, though, what Ray has illustrated is that we do need to make this a targeted benefit for people, because we're in a situation where we didn't envisage being in a hole that we're in. We've got to get out of this hole. What we're proposing is to make this a targeted benefit for pensioners, not something that is universal. But on top of that, we're protecting the triple lock, making these decisions so we can protect the triple lock. In April, that meant an extra £900 back in pensioners' pockets. The Chancellor has said that she will be looking to give pensioners more money in the next budget through the triple lock. And I think making sure that we've got that in the short term in place is exactly where we need to be. In the medium to longer term, we're going to have to help get people's energy bills in general down. We're going to have to make sure that we insulate as many homes as possible. Maybe even your own, Ray, we may be able to help support there. Because if we can bring energy bills down, if we can stabilise that for people, not just for pensioners, we can make sure that everybody has enough money in their pockets to live with dignity, really.
Ray?
Well, Jo, I mean, I voted for Labour this time round because of Keir Starmer's words saying things like, let those with broader shoulders take the burden. And the first thing he's done is to totally reverse that. And I don't see that that's fair at all. And where's the other £19 billion going to come from if all they can find is 1.3 billion taken from pensioners?
Natasha?
Well, I think the Chancellor is going through that at the moment. Once we get to see the budget, I'm not the Chancellor. I'm not going through that review, but I think we'll see more on detail on that as we come forward. But right now, the practical things that we're trying to do is ensure that we have enough pensioners signed up for pension credit. We have hundreds of thousands of pensioners who qualify for this benefit, who do not get it. It is our responsibility trying to get them to sign up for it. We're also making sure that local authorities continue to have the Household Support Fund, which has helped lots and lots of families and pensioners to get the support they need through the cost of living crisis.
All right. Well, Ray, stay with us for the rest of the discussion. Just to confirm, you'll be voting this through tomorrow?
Yes, I will be.
Will you, Saqib?
No, I won't. And look, I mean, ultimately, we've had to force the Labour Party into having the debate and the vote yesterday. Actually, Natasha has my sympathies, actually, in the sense it's a tough gig to come on here, have to defend this policy. I've spent the whole weekend speaking to pensioners, speaking to my constituents, and, one of them said to me, this is Keir Starmer's nasty Labour Party. It's a nasty party. They're using, they're paying for trade union paymasters on the back of pensioners. It's a horrible situation to be in, and a lot of my pensioners are going to have to choose between heating or eating this winter. It makes me so angry that having to try and speak to my pensioners and talk about this, really.
I think it's funny to talk about being angry. Your government has got us into this hole. Your government has decided not to, for example, work out how it was going to pay the money towards public sector workers for the independent review bodies. You hadn't put enough money aside to do that. What, are you happy to not pay nurses enough to stop them going to food banks? Are you happy for junior doctors to leave the country to go and find work elsewhere? Are you happy with that? Because personally, I think if we're going to ensure we've got economic stability, so those on fixed incomes do not have to bear the weather of an economy that goes up and down, we have to make sure those foundations are fixed.
Well, look, I think when we just saw the clip from Laura Kuenssberg, she actually challenged Keir Starmer and said actually 9 billion or 10 billion of the money that you're talking about is the decision that they've made with no efficiencies attached. They've paid the trade unions off. And by the way, where are the savings going to come from? Ray's absolutely right. You're basically going to hit the hardest hit in our society for an ideological battle.
Have paid the independent review bodies.
We were insisting.
You wouldn't have paid that.
What we were insisting on was that there should be
efficient. Well,
Natasha, I listened to you, so let me.
No, fair enough.
We were insisting on efficiency savings in return, and that's where the debate had got to. What we didn't do was write a blank cheque, and we didn't do it on the back of grandmothers and grandfathers up and down the country. That's what Keir Starmer's done, it's a terrible situation to be in.
Well, let's ask Ray on that, because critics have made much of the money that has been spent to settle some of the strikes and increase the pay, recommendations set out by the pay review bodies for train drivers, for nurses, for teachers. Did you agree with that, Ray?
Well, I mean, that was only settled after strikes, and the payment made was just to stop the strikes. Pensioners don't have that facility, Jo. It's we're in that sort of situation where a lot of pensioners have just got the basic income of £800 a month, which I guess, yes, £800 a month, which is next to nothing compared with the six-figure salaries that that Keir Starmer was talking about originally, those with the broader shoulders.
Alex and Ava, let's start with you, Alex. The number of silver millionaires, as they are sometimes called, has nearly quadrupled over the past decade to reach over 3 million in 2020. More than half now live in households with more than £500,000 in assets, up from 25% in 2008. Is there a legitimate argument by Labour to say these should be means tested, these payments?
Absolutely. Of course there is. You know, this idea that pensioners are all sort of, struggling to pay their heating, or they're all living in multi-million-pound houses is ridiculous. This is how things are set up in politics and with the media to make one side attack the other and so on and so forth. It needs to be means tested because it is nuanced. But at the same time, how do you go about that means testing? I know that Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert, has suggested it be done by council tax band. But then you might end up with somebody whose property, they bought it in London and now it's, due to a lack of housing, is worth a huge amount of money, but they've got no decent income. Should they be forced to sell it? It's an incredibly difficult circumstance.
Should they be forced to sell it?
Of course they should. It's an asset that they have. I think that the problem with this policy is that the pension credit is too low. £12,500 is not a reasonable amount for someone to then start paying their own heating. But one thing I thought was actually very interesting that you've just said, you've acknowledged the pain and possible death that could arise from this policy, the old people who physically have to choose between heating or eating. And what I find confusing about that is if you're able to identify that with pensioners, why were you not able to identify that when you took away the £20 universal credit uplift? Because a lot of people were plunged into poverty when you took that away, and they were also in the same situation as these pensioners will now find themselves in.
Well, look, we always made sure where it was possible to do those decisions and make those judgments. We were able to do so with the old age pensioners. Actually, all the stuff that Alex was just talking about, it's really, really difficult to do. And on the Labour Party's own analysis, actually, they said that, I think it was 2017, they said 4,000 people will die.
And how many people died of austerity?
This is the decision.
How many excess deaths were there from austerity?
Well, look, if we want to go all the way back, I'm happy to talk about how Labour The principle here, Jo, is very simple.
You can means test.
They're very difficult to do so, and you end up, as I said, the Labour Party's own analysis talked about 4,000 people are at risk of dying. That's their analysis. But ultimately, the difficulty here is the principle is they've made a political choice, right? They made a political choice to use pensioners to pay off the trade union paymasters. You can't get around that. And ultimately, we've got more pain to come. As Keir Starmer said in a very depressing speech, there's worse to come because that's the decisions they're going to make.
Your government spent the nation's reserves 3 times over. And we now need to make in-year savings. That's almost unprecedented.
Every government needs to make in-year savings. Every government has to do that.
Well, we'll come on to that in just a second, the savings.
Right,
but on this analysis, Natasha, it could kill 4,000. Let me just show the headline in the Daily Mail. Labour said cutting old age pensioners' winter fuel cash could kill 4,000. It refers to analysis from Labour in opposition during the 2017 general election campaign. Theresa May included plans to means test it in the Conservative Party manifesto, and you said the same. Do you stick by that analysis?
I wasn't responsible for that analysis.
But would it worry you now if that was Labour's analysis then?
It would, of course, it would concern me, but that's why we made sure that we were protecting the triple lock, and we can make sure we put more money into pensioners' pockets in general. And we've also got things like the Household Support Fund.
But would that not make the £1 billion saving redundant? Would that not make the whole thing a waste of time? I mean, if everyone who was eligible for pension credit did claim it, and you've said that you're going to help them get onto it, then what's the point in making that saving in the first place? Because it'll be eradicated. Wouldn't it have been better to go after a wealth tax? Even if you went after just the top 1% in this country, you could have raised £15 billion. That sure is much more valuable to the Exchequer than £1 billion.
I don't know what the long-term tax and spend plans are going to be within the budget when we come to that in October. So I will look for that and see what we will get. But on this point around it being a negligible amount of money, I think it's a longer-term principle, isn't it? If we means test this this benefit, it means that over the longer term, we won't be spending as much on it.
You said every government has to make in-year, you call it, savings. But if the government doesn't do this, what would you stop? government doing? Give me an example as a
Jo,
Conservative of something
Jo,
you would
I think,
stop doing.
Yeah, I think, look, it's an important question. I think when it came to paying off the trade unions, I think we were insisting on efficiency savings, because you have to look at modernisation, you have to find savings elsewhere. And actually, as Jeremy Hunt said when Rachel Reeves first came up with this alleged black hole, he said you have to make in-year savings. He was having to make those decisions all the way through. That's just the fact of governing. What we didn't do was put it on the backs of pensioners.
Right, I'm going to come back to Ray just to finish the discussion in a moment. But Alex, broadly, do you think in recent times policy has focused more on older voters, or they've been more protected from government cuts than young people?
It's hard to say, because this is a very popular thing to put around and say, well, because they vote Conservative, they've been looked after. But there is an argument that that could be the case. They haven't ever been means tested. And I remember Theresa May talking about the just about managings. And yet again, I feel constantly under every successive government, it's those people who are not. There's no social mobility in this country. There's no aspiration anymore. And if we want an economy to grow, if we don't want to rely on, have to rely on imported labour, which puts extra strains on the economy, then we need to look at that. We need to make sure that we are actually focusing on those people who, Starmer says, I'm not going to tax workers, OK? What does that mean? Because if you're taxing money, people have worked to earn it, whether they're doing it in the present moment, whether they're buying food and it's a stealth tax. Any tax is a tax on workers, because they're the people who are earning.
And we're going to hear more, of course, about all these tax and spend, but not until the end of October, October the 30th, with the budget. Ray, before we let you go, you said you regret already voting Labour. Is there anything that Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves can say in the coming weeks that will make you change your mind about regretting doing what you did in the election?
I don't think so, Jo. I think to say one thing prior to an election and then change their mind, you need a complete U-turn afterwards, is just lies. And I can't vote with hand on heart for a liar, I'm afraid.
Ray Bosdet, thank you very much for joining us. Now, have a listen to this from former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair.
If you don't have a clear idea of who's got a right to be here and who hasn't, which is what modern technology and a digital ID would give you, then, at any one time you can have 750,000 to 1 million people here without proper permission. So that's, in my view, that's the best way to deal with this issue.
Tony Blair talking to the BBC's Amal Rajan. So could digital ID help tackle illegal immigration? We're joined by Sam Sharps, Executive Director for Policy at Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Sam, how could digital ID work?
Well, at the Tony Blair Institute, we work with governments all around the world, and a huge number of them are focusing on digital ID at the moment for a lot of reasons. And there are all sorts of compelling business cases why investing in digital ID is a good idea. Specifically for illegal immigration, the issue that we know is that there's a certain pull factor to the UK in that we have an informal economy where people are able to come and work with limited oversight and without a great deal of enforcement of their rights of residence. We've tried to take action on this in the past in the country. For about 20 odd years now, we've had duties on employers and landlords to check people's rights of residency. But these are somewhat haphazardly applied, and enforcement is rather difficult. Digital ID could start to address that in exactly the way that Tony mentioned on the clip, which is to say it would for the first time give us a really strong idea of who's in the country, who has a right to be here, and it would allow both employers and enforcement agencies to do much more rigorous, much quicker, much more straightforward checks as to people's rights of residency and right to work. I mean,
earlier this year, Tony Blair said the UK will need a little persuading, his words, to embrace digital ID. And of course, Tony Blair himself tried to introduce, or did introduce it, but it was got rid of, not digital ID, but ID cards generally. What can you say? Why are people so worried, do you think, about it?
I remember quite well the debates around this the first time around. I was a government official working on some of that. And part of the issue was that we tended to get a little bit bogged down on a rather old-fashioned concept of what ID was about. We had this idea of ID cards. It was something you carried in your wallet, something you produced on request by a policeman. And really, we have a much more nuanced and modern idea now of what digital ID will allow you to do. People will have a digital wallet. It'll be as simple as an app on your phone. Rather than hand over all your personal details to anyone who needs proof of your age or your ability to do something, you'll have a kind of tokenized system whereby you can just be authenticated as, yes, this person's over 18, yes, this person has a right to work in the UK. or yes, this person has a right to a particular government benefit. And it should be much more straightforward. The business case to individuals was probably undersold at the time, and the concerns around it are, I guess, understandable in some certain people's points of view, but just we need to make that case really robustly and explain some of the safeguards around it.
All right, well, Sam, stay with us for the discussion. I mean, Natasha, it's been ruled out pretty quickly. There was a sort of brief thought from Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, that they might look at it, but it's been ruled out. Why?
I think because the government's just focusing on getting the job done. So I think if you think about immigration, simply making sure that the Home Office has the staff it needs to process cases means that we've seen a record number of returns as soon as we've come into government. So to kind of moving away from very simplistic approaches to things is paying dividends. So, moving on from things like Rwanda and making sure that we're actually just processing cases and getting on with the job and making sure that those teams are properly resourced is helping us kind of clear the backlog.
But you just heard from Sam, and actually the French Interior Minister has said it's one of the pull factors. Being able to come here, not having ID cards or digital ID means people can disappear more easily into the workforce. So that would help Labour's case and fight against illegal immigration.
I mean, would it? I mean, we have to really look into it. But I think at the moment the government is just focused on getting on with the job of setting up our border command and making sure we use that as a deterrent and making sure that so that we can end the devastating, awful situation we have with people dying in the Channel. That's where our focus is. That's where our energy is. I think when you get into a place that we've seen recently where you're focusing on other schemes and other projects, it takes a lot of focus and a lot of pull and resource away from the Home Office just getting on with their job.
Ava, do you think it's an idea that should have its time?
I don't think that it matters the way that it did during Blair's time. I think that all of the concerns and worries that we had about ID cards are actually redundant now that we carry smartphones around with us. So actually, private tech companies have so much information on you, and if your phone gets into the hand of the police because you've been arrested for something and they have a warrant to go through your phone, they'll know exactly where you've been for the past 4, 5 years. They'll be able to look at photographs of you, far more information than a government could ever have of you. So actually maybe the conversation should be, should we start regulating what private tech firms and what information they're allowed to hold of you, rather than whether government should be able to issue ID cards?
Right, you were a technology minister. Is this something Conservatives like you could ever embrace?
Well, look, when I first got appointed back in November 2023, I actually went out to Estonia, who have a centralised digital ID system. It works very well for them. They've obviously got Russia on their border. It works very well. It wasn't something that we thought would be feasible from a centralised big state perspective. It didn't work. However, what did work was clearly, technology is advanced. The private sector's adopting it. Banks are looking at it. So we were looking at, in terms of the data bill, making sure our data is safe. But look, Joe, the question was, will it stop the boats? And clearly it won't stop the boats, because we had a deterrent. Whether you agree with the deterrent or not, I know clearly Germany are starting to.
We don't know if it will ever work.
Germany are looking at that, and and clearly this Labour Party, and the reason this is in our narrative now is because they're just bereft of ideas and they don't know what they're going to do. And they were talking about digital IDs because that seems like the silver bullet. It's just not a silver bullet.
Sam, do you want to respond?
Well, don't get me wrong, I am absolutely not arguing that this is a silver bullet or this will prevent all channel crossings or anything like that. Clearly, there are a lot of other measures the government is going to need to take and is already looking at, as far as I understand, around international cooperation, around proper resources for returning people and so on. The thing I would say about the informal economy and the demand factor for people coming to work in jobs in the UK is that whether or not we believe there's a real pull from the informal economy, the gangs who are smuggling people in absolutely do believe this. And if the government's serious about smashing the gangs, which I very much hope they are, this is one factor we're going to have to address. I totally get the political concerns around digital ID, and there's a certain history here. What I would say is the current government, I think building on the legacy of the last one, is already going some way towards bringing people into a form of digital ID through its government sign-on process, which is starting to gather more and more people in. And this will become an argument that becomes pretty much unassailable.
Alex, what do you make of those arguments? And just to remind our viewers and you, the French Interior Minister said specifically the UK is a place you can work without papers and have little chance of being exploited.
I'm for this.
Expelled, I should say.
I'm very much for this. I lived in Belgium, and as a Belgian resident, you go and you sign up at your local commune and you have a digital ID card, and guess what? It ties into your health insurance and all these other things. And I think it's long overdue we have this. We have a massive black market. You see that walking up any high street, car washes, nail bars. We've had health tourism issues for a very long time. People who are here who have outstayed their welcome, who shouldn't be here. We don't know who they are. We've got people coming in and out of the country with criminal records. We're one of the most poorest countries when it comes to actually protecting our welfare system. Look, we've had people, Albanian gangs, exploiting our welfare system to the tune of millions of pounds. That shows how overdue a policy like this is.
And you think that would change it?
Well, I think it's one step. You need to do something. What I would worry about is we have a load of digital ID cards issued, and what happens is the enforcement where it needs to take place doesn't take place, and actually a whole load of other people feel that they're suddenly living under a sort of Chinese Communist Party social credit system. So we need to make sure it's not dystopian, but if it means someone isn't in this country legally who's got no right to medical treatment and they say, well, where's your card? Sorry, you can't have it, which would happen if you were in Belgium, then that is a step we need to take.
But I don't know if I buy all of that, because there's always been tax evasion in this country. I mean, if you look at the 70s and 80s, people were queuing up for the dole while also working at the same time and probably being paid cash in hand. No, but the argument that you're making is the exploitation.
Or not?
But you're arguing that there's an exploitation of the welfare state and of the health, of the NHS, and actually that's still going on. An ID card and migration isn't the reason that's being exploited.
Foreign gangs setting up syndicates, creating fake IDs in order to extort millions of pounds from this country.
Well, Saqib, you don't think that would make any difference?
And to be clear, I think there's a choice between the state doing it and the private sector doing it. And what we were looking at was the private sector. So, and what we saw in Estonia actually was that when the banks adopted it, that was when we had widespread adoption. Clearly, you are moving in that direction. I would be very uncomfortable with governments holding loads of biometric data on citizens, and those were the protections that we were looking at.
Do you mind that TikTok holds that information and that Meta holds that information?
Yeah, I do, and that's why I'm not on TikTok actually, and that's why I came off it.
But what about Meta? Are you on X?
Well, look, that's exactly why we were taking all the measures we were doing in the data bill and how they're approaching it. We've yet to see what the Labour government will do. When I was at the dispatch box last week, there was talk of the digital ID and the One ID actually, and the logins, which we started off. But there is, of course, we don't want to be, I was a tech minister for the UK. We're not anti-tech. We want to move forward, but it's got to be done in a safe way. But this will not stop the votes.
Right. I mean, listening to what Alex was saying about people working here illegally, Labour have already said they're going to have, or they've had, a summer blitz on raiding nail bars and car washes where there are people, or they may be working illegally. So, in a way, you've sort of accepted that it's a problem. Why this aversion, then, to having a digital ID, which could help in that?
Well, I think just picking up on one of the points Alex made, it's all about enforcement, isn't it? And if we haven't got the capacity within the Home Office to do that enforcement piece, really, this will just be a conversation that goes backwards and forwards, as it has done for many, many years. So I think the government's approach at the moment to focus on making sure we've got enough people in the Home Office to process cases, making sure that where people shouldn't be here are returned in a orderly manner. That's what we should be focusing on.
Do you think a Labour government over the next 5 years would look at it? You say at the moment.
I mean, if I had a crystal ball...
Yeah, but would you like it? I mean, you're a Labour MP. Would you like them to look at it?
I'd like us to be creative in what we think about how we tackle these issues that the whole entire world is facing. We've got mass migration into lots of European countries, and we need to work across border to make sure that we look at that. So I'd like us to be creative in what we do, but I think making sure that we get the basics right, making sure that people are actually in the Home Office processing these cases is exactly where we should be focusing our energy.
A final word from you, Sam. Do you think you're going to get anywhere with this campaign for a digital ID with a Labour government?
Well, as I said, we work with governments all around the world, and a huge number of them are starting to go down this path and implement this sort of policy. I think we'll continue making the case. I think the case is quite strong in the UK for all sorts of different reasons. We've talked a lot about immigration, but there's a lot around reducing fraud, targeting benefits, running government more efficiently. There are lots and lots of reasons why digital ID, I think, is a very, very strong proposition for the UK, as it is everywhere else. We'll carry on having that conversation.
Sam Sharps from the Tony Blair Institute, thank you for joining us. Let's talk about right to buy and have a look at this headline, a recent headline in The Times. Labour to tighten up Right to Buy to stop house flipping. Downing Street insisted the policy would not be scrapped, but council tenants will have to pay tens of thousands more to buy their homes. There are a number of things that the government is considering, and ministers are looking at reforms which might include reducing discounts on the sale of council homes, restricting the right to buy for new build council houses, and increasing the number of years that a person has to live in a council home to 10 years, up from 3 currently. Would you like to see Right to Buy scrapped altogether, Natasha?
I think this approach is the sensible approach. Having a consultation with local government is key to this. I grew up in social housing, so I could talk about this all day. And I know people that did very well out of Right to Buy. The problem is that things have changed since it started. And at the moment, this sort of centralised way in which we manage it isn't working for local councils. I think we should be working with local government to work out what need they have locally. At the moment, councils are in a bizarre situation where not only do they have millions of pounds that they're spending on temporary accommodation charges, we as a taxpayer are now subsidising ex-council houses that are being rented back on the private sector through housing benefit. We're now spending billions of pounds on that when we could be using that money for council housing. So I think reviewing it and ensuring that it works for local areas is what we should be doing. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, so I'm very glad that the government is looking at this again. I know we will talk about things like aspiration, and we'll talk about people, that pride of owning your own home.
It transformed many people's lives.
Of course it did, and I think having that nugget there and having that there is great. However, at the moment, the people that contact me as an MP, the people that have contacted me as a local councillor, were people whose aspiration was to live in a house that was big enough for their toddler to walk in, that didn't have mould, and they weren't bounced around after a Section 21 eviction, that their kids go to the same school. That's the aspiration that a lot of people living in social housing or on the waiting lists are feeling right now.
We saw Margaret Thatcher at the top of the programme. It's one of those policies that people remember her for, whether they supported it or not. But has it had its time?
Well, look, first of all, no wonder Keir Starmer found Margaret Thatcher's portrait unsettling. He was about to kibosh one of her main policies. But look, the reality is, when we
didn't want her looking at him as he did it.
When you talk about home ownership, it is about that first moment when people feel a stake in society. And look at this programme. What we've just talked about. We talked about prisoner release. We've talked about pensioners, and now we're talking about hard-working people not having, making it harder for them to buy their first home. I'm perfectly happy to defend our record. We built 2.5 million houses. We had the right to buy.
But you agree there's a housing crisis?
Yeah, well, of course there's more housing needed, but it's about how you go about it. And what Angela Rayner's done is now said, OK, affecting my constituency is, build on the green belt, concrete over that. And actually, the stats and the demand on the cities is much lower. And that's where you need the housing. That's fundamentally the issue.
Do you support reform Right to Buy?
I mean, my own family benefited from Right to Buy, and I know how transformative that can be for people's lives. But, I think that your argument there is broken because you acknowledge that Right to Buy is brilliant and it empowers people to own their own homes. But while the Conservatives were in government, you did very, very little to get any young people onto the housing ladder. You even actually closed the Help to Buy scheme, which wasn't actually very good in the first place, if we're being honest. You also expanded shared ownership, which is probably the best way that you can continue to rent a home but own it in name only. One of the worst financial decisions you can possibly take. You're also advocating against building on the green belt. Well, where are these houses going to go? And you're going to say to me brownfield sites, but you also blocked a lot of brownfield sites when you were in government. So, you can diagnose the problem, but you've got to offer a solution.
Look, the solution was there. We were putting money forward for brownfield first in the West Midlands. Andy Street championed it. I worked with him on it. I saw it firsthand. In 2021, we had the highest record amount of first-time buyers getting onto the housing ladder. Actually, I disagree with much of what Ava just said, unsurprisingly. But fundamentally, if you are going to build housing, you've got to build it in the cities. By the way, when Dominic Cummings came up with the housing formula back in 2020, I challenged him on this. I thought, for me, this was about making sure, because what it did is it tripled numbers in countryside areas and it halved numbers in your urban areas. And actually, Angela Rayner's just gone and reinvigorated this.
I think what we should be looking for housing is not having people having to move out of the cities and villages, the towns and villages that they've grown up in, to have to move to cities. We want people to be able to live where they grew up. We want them to be able to have jobs in local economies so that they can keep these towns functioning. just saying to people, don't build near here, go and build in the city and just get all our young people out of it. That's just not unsustainable. Who's going to look after all of the pensioners we were talking about? Who's going to be the teachers in the schools if they can't afford to live there? So I think the time has changed. We need to review this policy. We need to make sure that it's still fit for purpose and it still ensures and empowers people to own their own home, but also make sure that they have a stable house over their head, because that's how you get stability and dignity in life.
Alice?
Well, most people can't afford to live in the city. That is where most of the problems are, actually, especially young people like me. I mean, how on earth am I supposed to buy something in London? And I'm actually a high earner. I'm one of those people who pays more in tax than I ever take off the state, and I'm locked out of buying a house. So that's a ridiculous system. The problem is there's not been enough volume of housing. We've had so many issues with planning. That needs to be ripped up and looked at again. I mean, yes, we all want to protect Greenbelt and all the rest of it, but we've got to get real. But we've also got to get real about talking about demographic change and how we match infrastructure to meet that. Because if you're building 2.5 million new houses, great, round of applause, but how many people came into the country during that period of time when we had net migration running at 750,000? A lot of these people end up going into the housing sector. Where are they going to live? So we need a holistic approach to all of this. And no one is talking about the elephant in the room with all of these topics that we've covered today, which is just massive, planning, busting numbers of people coming into the country.
Right. Well, just to go back, though, as you say, you want a holistic approach, a whole load of measures. Does that include either scrapping right to buy or reforming it in the way Labour is proposing?
I think the reform approach is actually a good approach, can I say? Because one thing I don't like is the idea that people can cynically use it, like Angela Rayner did, frankly, to line her pockets with money when that money has come from other taxpayers propping that aspiration
Well,
up.
hang on. She benefited from a 25% discount on buying her council home in 2007. Are you saying she shouldn't have been able to do?
Well, no, but then she sold it on for a nice little profit. And so I think that if
But
if we do have reform saying if you're going to benefit from a system and perhaps live there for X period of time, I think that those sorts of things are fair.
Natasha, do you want to defend Angela Rayner?
I would love to. I think that's an unfair accusation. I think that many people, I know people myself who have benefited in the same way. That they had a family home, they sold it, they bought it on right to buy it, and they then moved on. That's the whole point of it. That's what it was there for. The problems we have had, though, is that when we've sold off that stock, it has not been replaced. And actually, when people are doing that en masse, we've got private landlords who've taken ex-council houses and are selling them back to people.
Who are then supposed to build the new stock.
Well, it was actually quite hard to get hold of figures to look at how many homes have been sold under right to buy since it was introduced. But some figures, I think from the New Economics Foundation, said it was around 2 million homes. As Alex said, it hasn't been replaced. How big a problem is that?
Well, massive. It's a sieve, isn't it? So, I mean, if there's no houses left, this is why we're in the situation that we're in at the moment, because there is, these houses, that some of them were bought for around £180,000 and they're being sold off for over £1 million. The council now cannot afford to build in those areas because the cost of housing has gone up so much.
Right. Let me just briefly, before the end of the programme, show you this tweet on a completely different subject, the Tory leadership contest, because the next round of voting is happening tomorrow. Kevin Hollinrake, Shadow Minister. I'm backing Kemi Badenoch, seen by many as the favourite for leader. I've worked with Kemi in government for several years and she makes things happen. You can read on. She showed decisive leadership, etc., etc. Sakib Bhatt, I understand you had been backing Priti Patel, who is no longer in the race. So
thanks for reminding me.
Yes. So who are you transferring your support to?
To be honest, Jo, I'm going to go to the hustings today. I've met with all the candidates. I know them. They're all very, very good people. I'll make my judgment tomorrow when I go to vote.
Right. Oh, is it the hustings today or tomorrow? I mean, is the vote
hustings
tomorrow?
today, I believe, and there's a vote tomorrow.
And the vote is tomorrow. I mean, in terms of the others who are left, who do you think will still be there or won't be there after tomorrow?
I'm terrible at predicting elections, including my own. And so the truth of the matter is, we've got a good array of people. I met Kemi on the weekend. She was in my constituency, actually. She was very good, very good. I spoke to James, spoke to Tom, spoke to Rob Jenrick. They're all good people, and Mel, of course. All very, very good people. So I'll be making my judgment.
But they didn't visit your constituency.
We'll talk. See what happens.
Alex, any advice? Who do you think might make it to the final two?
Just for the purpose of, as a journalist and watching things and wanting, activity and energy in politics, I would back Kemi because I think she'll have Keir Starmer on the run at the dispatch box.
Is Kemi Badenoch the candidate Labour's most scared of?
Well, there's no like secret WhatsApp group with that stuff going around. I have no idea. So I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, with the amount of kind of people applying for committee chairs. I haven't even paid attention to this, so I don't.
Oh, well, maybe you should. That's all for today. Thank you to all of my guests. I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here, so please join us. Bye-bye.